The smell of coal and dampness filled Josephine Bauer's lungs as she descended into the Silver Creek mine, her heart as heavy as the pickaxe strapped to her back. 1874 had been a cruel year in Colorado Territory, first taking her father to consumption, then leaving her with a mountain of debt and a deed to a mine that most men in town considered worthless. But Josephine wasn't most men, and she certainly wasn't going to surrender to destitution without a fight. "Miss Bauer, you shouldn't be down here," called out Mr. Higgins, the elderly mine foreman who had worked for her father. "It ain't proper for a lady." "Proper won't pay the bank, Mr. Higgins," she replied, adjusting the miner's cap on her head. At 22, Josephine had long ago stopped caring about what was proper. Life on the frontier had taught her that survival trumped societal expectations. Besides, I need to see for myself what father was so excited about before he passed. Josephine's father had claimed in his fevered final days that he'd found a rich new silver vein deep in the mine, one that would change their fortunes forever. She had promised him she would find it, though whether his claim was real or the delusion of a dying man remained to be seen. The lantern swung in her hand, casting eerie shadows against the rough-hewn walls as she ventured deeper into the earth than she'd ever gone before. The main shaft had been well traveled, but as she followed her father's hastily drawn map, the passages grew narrower, the support beams older and less reliable. "You shouldn't be here alone, Miss Bauer," Mr. Higgins had warned before she left him at his post. "These old tunnels ain't been properly maintained since your father took ill." She'd ignored him, of course. Josephine Bauer had been ignoring well-meaning advice since she was old enough to walk. The tunnel forked and she paused, consulting the map by lantern light. Left would take her deeper into the mountain, toward where her father had marked an X with shaking hands. A distant rumble made her freeze, not an uncommon sound in mines, but unsettling nonetheless. She pressed on, ducking beneath a low-hanging beam. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. Josephine's lantern flickered and she held it higher, squinting at the rock face. There was that a gleam of silver. She stepped closer, raising her hand to touch the wall. Another rumble, louder this time. A shower of dust fell from the ceiling and Josephine's heart began to race. She turned back toward the main shaft, but too late a deafening crack split the air, and the tunnel ahead collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of rock and timber. The force of it knocked her backward. The lantern flew from her hand, crashing against the ground. The flame sputtered once, twice, then died, plunging her into absolute darkness. Panic clawed at her throat. "Hello," she called, her voice echoing in the blackness. "Mr. Higgins, anyone?" Silence answered her. Josephine felt her way to the wall, using it to guide herself as she moved away from the collapse. Her breathing came in sharp, ragged gasps. The darkness pressed in on her from all sides, suffocating complete. She wasn't sure how long she stumbled through the darkness, minutes or hours, when she heard it. Footsteps. The sound of boots on stone coming closer. "Hello," she called again, hope surging through her. "Hello there," a man's voice answered, deep and steady. A faint light appeared around the bend, growing stronger. "Anyone hurt down here?" "I'm here," Josephine called, relief making her dizzy. "My lantern went out in the collapse." The light rounded the corner, illuminating a tall figure. As he drew closer, the lantern revealed a man Josephine had never seen before, broad-shouldered, with a weathered face and eyes the color of a summer sky. He wore dusty work clothes, a bandana around his neck, and a wide-brimmed hat that had seen better days. "You're a mighty long way from town, madam," he said, his expression shifting from concern to surprise as he took in her appearance. "And these tunnels ain't safe." "I'm aware," she replied, straightening her spine. "I'm Josephine Bauer, this is my mine." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Your mine?" "My father's. He passed last month." The man's face softened. "I'm sorry to hear that." He tipped his hat slightly. "Forrest Tucker, I'm new to these parts. Been working claims up north, decided to try my luck down here." "You're trespassing, Mr. Tucker," Josephine said, though there was little heat in her voice. It was difficult to be angry with the man who had just saved her from being entombed in darkness. He smiled, a flash of white teeth in his tanned face. "Reckon I am. And you're in trouble, Miss Bauer." "That collapse has blocked the main way out." Fear returned, cold in her belly. "There must be another way." Forrest nodded. "There is, but it's a fair piece through some tricky tunnels." He held his lantern higher, studying her face. "You don't look like you're fixing to turn back from whatever brought you down here in the first place." "I'm not," she confirmed. He extended his free hand to her, his expression serious but kind. "Then I suggest you take my hand, Miss Bauer. Your lantern went out in the mine, and it's dangerous to be wandering blind down here." Josephine hesitated, staring at his outstretched hand. She wasn't in the habit of taking help from strangers, especially not handsome male strangers who were trespassing on her property. But the darkness behind her loomed like a physical presence, and Forrest Tucker's calm confidence was the only light in sight. "Hold my hand," he said more softly. "We'll find the light together. I know these mountains better than most." Something in his steady gaze convinced her. Josephine placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and strength of his calloused palm. "Lead on, Mr. Tucker," she said. "But understand this, I still intend to find what I came for." His smile returned, more measured this time. "Wouldn't expect anything less, Miss Bauer." He squeezed her hand gently. "Now stay close. These old mines have a way of swallowing folks who don't respect them." As they moved deeper into the mine, lantern light dancing on the walls around them, Josephine couldn't help but wonder if she'd just made a deal with the devil or found an unexpected guardian angel. Either way, with the main shaft collapsed behind them, her future now depended on trusting this stranger to lead her back to daylight after she found her father's silver vein. "What brought you down here alone?" Forrest asked as they navigated the narrow passage, his hand still firmly holding hers. "My father believed he found a rich silver vein before he died. He left me a map," Josephine replied, ducking under a low beam. "The bank is threatening to foreclose on everything we own. I need to find that silver." Forrest glanced back at her, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. "These mountains hold their treasures tight, Miss Bauer. Men have died chasing dreams of silver and gold. I'm not afraid of hard work or danger, Mr. Tucker." "I can see that," he replied, a hint of admiration in his voice. "But there's a difference between courage and recklessness." They reached a junction where 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. Josephine consulted her father's map, pointing to the rightmost passage. "This way." Forrest hesitated. "That tunnel doesn't look too stable. It's where my father marked the silver vein." Josephine pulled her hand from his grasp and moved toward the passage. "You're welcome to wait here and let you wander off into an unstable tunnel alone." "Not likely," he muttered, following her. "Your father must have been quite a man to raise a daughter so determined." "He was," Josephine said, a lump forming in her throat. "He taught me that nothing worth having comes easy." The tunnel narrowed as they proceeded, the ceiling lower, the air thicker with dust. Josephine's heart pounded in her chest, not just from exertion, but from growing excitement. If her father was right, if there truly was a rich vein of silver ahead, her problems would be solved. "Stop," Forrest said suddenly, throwing an arm across her path. "Look there." He raised the lantern, illuminating a section of wall ahead where the rock face had been freshly chipped away. Something gleamed in the lantern light, a streak of metallic gray running through the stone. "Silver," Josephine breathed, moving closer. He was right. Forrest examined the vein carefully. "High-grade ore from the looks of it. Your father found a good one, Miss Bauer." Tears stung Josephine's eyes as she ran her fingers over the silvery streak. He knew all along this mine wasn't played out. A distant rumble interrupted the moment, and Forrest frowned. "We should go. That collapse earlier might have weakened other sections." "I need to take a sample to show the bank," Josephine said, reaching for her pickaxe. "Make it quick," Forrest urged, holding the lantern higher so she could see. Josephine chipped away at the rock face, collecting several pieces of ore-rich rock in a small pouch. With each strike of her pickaxe, small showers of dust fell from the ceiling. "That's enough," Forrest said firmly when another rumble, closer this time, shook the tunnel. "We need to leave. Now." Josephine nodded, securing her pouch and slinging the pickaxe back over her shoulder. They retraced their steps to the junction, but as they turned toward what Forrest had described as an alternate way out, a deafening crack split the air. "Run!" Forrest shouted, grabbing her hand and pulling her forward as the tunnel behind them began to collapse. They sprinted through the passageway, the roar of falling rock pursuing them like a hungry beast. Dust filled the air, choking them, and the lantern swung wildly in Forrest's hand, casting frantic shadows. A stone struck Josephine's shoulder, nearly knocking her down, but Forrest's grip on her hand remained firm, pulling her onward. They burst into a larger chamber just as the tunnel behind them completely gave way. Forrest pulled Josephine against him, shielding her with his body as dust and debris billowed around them. For several long moments they stood there, coughing and gasping for breath, his arms still around her. When the dust began to settle, Forrest stepped back, his eyes scanning her for injuries. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "No," Josephine replied, though her shoulder throbbed where the rock had struck it. "Are you?" "I'm fine," he said, turning to survey their surroundings. The chamber was larger than the tunnels, with several passages leading off in different directions. "Good news is, I know where we are. Bad news is, our shortest way out is now blocked." "There's another way," Forrest nodded, wiping dust from his face. "Longer route through some old workings, but it'll get us to the surface." He glanced at her, his expression softening. "You did well back there. Most folks would have panicked." "Panic doesn't solve problems," Josephine said, though her racing heart betrayed her calm exterior. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No, it surely doesn't." He offered his hand again. "Shall we continue our adventure, Miss Bauer?" This time, Josephine took his hand without hesitation. There was something about Forrest Tucker that inspired trust, despite the circumstances of their meeting. Perhaps it was the steady way he handled danger or the respect in his eyes when he looked at her. "Lead on, Mr. Tucker," she said, adjusting the pouch of silver ore securely at her waist. They moved through the chamber and into another tunnel, this one wider but clearly older than the others. Wooden support beams, weathered and sagging, lined the walls, and the floor was uneven beneath their feet. "These are some of the earliest workings in this mountain," Forrest explained as they walked, "dug back in the 50s when silver was first discovered here." "You know a lot about these mines for someone who claims to be new to the area," Josephine observed. Forrest glanced back at her, a cryptic smile on his lips. "I make it my business to know the lay of the land wherever I go. Keeps a man alive in this country." "And what brought you to Silver Creek, Mr. Tucker?" "Same thing that brings most men to mining towns, looking for opportunity." He paused, helping her over a particularly rough section of ground. "Though I admit, I didn't expect to find it by rescuing a stubborn mine owner from the dark." "I wasn't in need of rescuing," Josephine protested. "I would have found my way out eventually." "Of course you would have," he agreed, though the twinkle in his eye suggested otherwise. "Just like I wasn't trespassing, merely exploring." Despite everything, Josephine found herself smiling. "We seem to have reached an impasse in our disagreement, Mr. Tucker." "Then perhaps we should agree to start fresh once we're back in the daylight," he suggested. "Speaking of which, we should be coming up on," he stopped abruptly, raising the lantern. Ahead, the tunnel appeared to end in a solid wall of rock. "That's not right," he muttered, moving forward to inspect it. "There should be a passage here." Josephine's heart sank as she watched him examine the rock face. "Another collapse, looks like it. Must have happened recently?" Forrest ran his hand along the wall, frowning. "This complicates things." "Is there another way?" He turned back to her, his expression serious. "There is, but it's not one I'd choose if we had options. It goes deeper before it comes up, through some flooded sections." "Flooded?" Josephine repeated, alarm creeping into her voice. "Not fully underwater, but we'll get wet," Forrest clarified, "and it's a harder climb out." He studied her face. "I need to know you can handle it, Miss Bauer." Josephine straightened her shoulders, ignoring the throb of pain where the rock had struck her. "I can handle whatever I need to, Mr. Tucker. I didn't come this far to turn back now." He nodded, something like respect flickering in his eyes. "Then we'd best get moving. The longer we stay down here, the more likely we are to run into more trouble." They backtracked to the chamber and took a different tunnel, one that sloped downward at a steeper angle. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as they descended. Josephine could hear water dripping somewhere ahead, the sound echoing off the stone walls. "Stay close to me," Forrest advised as the tunnel floor became slick with moisture. "It gets tricky from here." The passage narrowed, forcing them to proceed single file with Forrest leading the way. Water trickled down the walls now, and the floor beneath their feet had become a shallow stream. "The mine intersects with natural caves in this section," Forrest explained, his voice echoing slightly. "The water table is high here." "How do you know all this?" Josephine couldn't help asking again. Forrest was quiet for a moment before answering. "I worked these mines years ago when I was hardly more than a boy, left to try my luck elsewhere, but I know these mountains like the back of my hand." "You worked for my father?" "No," he said, helping her down a particularly steep section. "This was before your father acquired the claim." "Different owners back then." The water was ankle deep now, cold enough to make Josephine's feet ache inside her boots. The tunnel widened suddenly into another chamber, this one with a ceiling that soared beyond the reach of their lantern light. Water flowed across the floor in small rivulets, converging into a deeper pool on the far side. "We'll have to wade through," Forrest said, gesturing to the pool. "It's not too deep chest high at the worst, but the water's cold." Josephine eyed the dark water apprehensively. "Is there no other way?" "Not unless you fancy spending the night down here," he replied, "which I don't recommend." She sighed, securing her pouch of silver ore more tightly. "Very well." Forrest handed her the lantern. "Hold this high. I'll go first to check the depth, then you follow in my footsteps exactly." "The bottom is uneven." He stepped into the water, wincing slightly at the cold. As he waded deeper, the water rose to his waist, then to the middle of his chest before leveling off. "It's solid underfoot," he called back. "Just move slow and steady." Taking a deep breath, Josephine followed, gasping as the icy water enveloped her legs, then her torso. By the time she reached Forrest, her teeth were chattering uncontrollably. "Almost there," he encouraged, taking the lantern from her trembling hand. "Just a bit farther." The water gradually became shallower on the other side of the pool, until they were once again wading through ankle-deep streams. Josephine's clothes clung to her, heavy and cold, but the relief of being out of the deeper water made her light-headed. "There's a chamber ahead where we can rest for a moment," Forrest said, noting her exhaustion. "The airflow is better there, might help dry us out a bit." The chamber he led her to was smaller than the others, but as he'd promised, a distinct breeze flowed through it, suggesting a connection to the surface somewhere above. Forrest set the lantern on a rock and removed his soaked coat. "You should take off your outer layers," he advised, not looking at her as he wrung water from his coat. "You'll warm up faster." Josephine hesitated, acutely aware of the impropriety, but the chill seeping into her bones overrode her concerns. She removed her heavy wool coat, wincing as the movement aggravated her injured shoulder. Forrest noticed her discomfort. "You are hurt," he said, moving closer. "It's nothing," she insisted. "Just a bruise from that falling rock." "Let me see," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Reluctantly, Josephine turned, allowing him to examine her shoulder. His touch was gentle as he probed the area. "No bones broken, but you'll have quite a bruise," he concluded. "We should bind it when we get to the surface, keep it from stiffening up too much." "Thank you," she said quietly, suddenly aware of his proximity, of the concern in his blue eyes. She looked away, uncomfortable with the flutter in her stomach. "For all of this, for helping me." "Don't thank me yet," he replied with a small smile. "We're still underground." They sat in silence for a few minutes, allowing the breeze to partially dry their clothes. Josephine's mind raced with questions about this man who had appeared so fortuitously in her hour of need, who knew the mines so well yet claimed to be new to the area. "Why did you really come back to Silver Creek, Mr. Tucker?" she finally asked. Forrest looked up, his expression guarded. "What makes you think I wasn't telling the truth?" "You know these mines too well for someone just passing through," she observed. "And there's something in the way you talk about this place like it matters to you." He was quiet for so long that Josephine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost wistful. "I was born in Silver Creek, left when I was 17 after my parents died. Wanted to make my fortune elsewhere." His eyes met hers. "But some places call you back no matter how far you roam." "What happened to your parents?" Josephine asked softly. "Mine collapse," he replied, his gaze shifting to the lantern flame. "Not this mine, but one nearby. Father was a miner, mother took in laundry. After they were gone, there wasn't much to keep me here." "I'm sorry," Josephine said, understanding all too well the ache of losing family. Forrest nodded in acknowledgement. "Life on the frontier is hard, takes more than it gives most times." He stood, stretching his long frame. "We should get moving if we want to reach the surface before full dark." They continued their journey through a maze of tunnels, some natural, some man-made. The path began to slope upward, and Josephine felt a surge of hope. Her clothes were still damp, and exhaustion tugged at her limbs, but the prospect of seeing daylight again spurred her onward. "Almost there," Forrest said as they entered a tunnel where the breeze was stronger. "There's an old vertical shaft ahead that connects to the surface. It has ladder rungs hammered into the wall, not the most comfortable climb, but it'll get us out." The shaft, when they reached it, was intimidating, a dark vertical tunnel disappearing upward beyond the reach of their lantern light. Rusted iron rungs protruded from one wall, forming a makeshift ladder. "I'll go first," Forrest said, securing the lantern to his belt. "Test the rungs before you put your full weight on them. Some might be loose." He looked at her seriously. "If you feel yourself slipping, call out immediately. Don't try to be brave." "I understand," Josephine said, eyeing the shaft with trepidation. Forrest started climbing, moving carefully from rung to rung. When he was about 20 feet up, he paused. "Your turn, Miss Bauer, take it slow." The climb was even more difficult than Josephine had anticipated. Her injured shoulder protested with every movement, and the rusted rungs bit into her hands. But she persevered, focusing on Forrest's boots above her, on the promise of open sky somewhere above. They climbed in silence, conserving their breath for the exertion. After what seemed like an eternity, Forrest called down, "I can see daylight, just a bit farther." Minutes later, he disappeared from view, and Josephine heard his voice calling encouragement from above. With a final burst of effort, she climbed the last few rungs and felt strong hands grasp her arms, pulling her up and out of the shaft. The sudden brightness was blinding after so many hours underground. Josephine blinked rapidly, taking in great gulps of fresh air as Forrest steadied her on her feet. "Welcome back to the world, Miss Bauer," he said with a smile, his face golden in the late afternoon sunlight. They were on the western slope of the mountain, in a small clearing surrounded by pine trees. In the distance, the town of Silver Creek was visible in the valley below, smoke rising from chimneys against the backdrop of mountains painted in sunset hues. Josephine laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside her. "I never thought I'd be so happy to see the sky." Forrest's smile widened, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "It's a sight that never grows old, especially after being underground." Exhausted but elated, Josephine sank down onto a nearby boulder, wincing as her muscles protested. The silver ore in her pouch felt heavier now, weighed with significance. She pulled out a piece, watching it glint in the sunlight. "It's really there," she said quietly. "My father wasn't delirious." "The silver is real." Forrest sat beside her, examining the ore she held. "High grade, too. You've got yourself a valuable claim, Miss Bauer." "Thanks to you," she said, looking at him with genuine gratitude. "I would have been lost in the dark if you hadn't found me." "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for," Forrest replied, "but I'm glad I was there all the same." As they sat side by side, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Josephine felt something shift between them, a connection forged in darkness and danger, something more profound than mere gratitude or attraction. "Will you stay in Silver Creek now?" she asked, suddenly anxious to know his plans. Forrest was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the distant town. "I wasn't planning to," he admitted, "but plans have a way of changing when you least expect them to." He turned to look at her, a question in his eyes that made Josephine's heart beat faster. "Would you object if I decided to stay a while longer, Miss Bauer?" "Not at all, Mr. Tucker," she replied, a smile tugging at her lips. "In fact, I believe the Silver Creek mine might be in need of a new foreman, someone who knows the old tunnels." His answering smile was slow and warm, like sunshine breaking through clouds. "I might be interested in such a position, especially if it came with the opportunity to see more of the mine owner." Josephine felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. "I believe that could be arranged." As the last light of day faded from the sky and the first stars appeared overhead, Josephine Bauer and Forrest Tucker began the long walk back to town, their future as interwoven as their hands, which remained clasped together long after there was any need for guidance through the dark. The news of silver being discovered in the old Bauer mine spread through Silver Creek faster than a prairie fire. By the time Josephine and Forrest reached town, tired and disheveled but triumphant, several curious onlookers had gathered outside the assayer's office, where they'd headed directly to confirm the value of their find. "Highest grade ore I've seen in these parts in years," declared Harold Monroe, the town's assayer, holding one of Josephine's samples up to the lamplight. His eyebrows rose as he calculated figures on a scrap of paper. "Based on this sample, Miss Bauer, you're sitting on a very valuable claim indeed." Relief washed over Josephine. "Valuable enough to satisfy the bank." "I'd say so," Monroe nodded, scratching his beard. "Old man Jenkins over at the Silver Creek Bank would be a fool to foreclose now. This vein could yield for years to come." Standing beside her, Forrest squeezed Josephine's hand gently. They'd cleaned up somewhat at the water pump behind the assayer's office, but still bore the marks of their underground ordeal: dust-streaked faces, damp clothes, and in Josephine's case, a painful shoulder that Forrest had insisted on binding with his bandana before they descended the mountain. "We should get you to the doctor," Forrest said quietly as they left the assayer's office, navigating through the small crowd that had gathered. "That shoulder needs proper tending." "Tomorrow," Josephine replied, fatigue evident in her voice. "Right now, I just want to go home." The Bauer homestead sat on the outskirts of town, a modest but well-built cabin with a barn and small corral. Josephine had grown up there, watching her father leave for the mine each morning, hoping each day would bring the strike that would secure their future. Now, as she approached the familiar porch, lantern light glowing in the windows, she felt a bittersweet pang. "He should be here to see this," she said softly. Forrest nodded in understanding. "He led you to it, though. His map worked." "Miss Bauer," a voice called from the doorway. Martha Fletcher, the neighbor who had been checking on the place in Josephine's absence, hurried down the steps. "Heavens above, we've been worried sick. Mr. Higgins said there was a collapse in the mine and you were down there." "I'm fine, Mrs. Fletcher," Josephine assured the older woman. "Thanks to Mr. Tucker here." Martha's eyes narrowed as she took in Forrest's appearance. "And who might you be, young man?" "Forrest Tucker, madam," he replied, tipping his hat. "I had the good fortune to be in the right place at the right time." Martha's expression remained suspicious. "Well, Miss Josephine, you look dead on your feet. Come inside and I'll fix you something to eat." She glanced at Forrest. "I suppose you'd better come too if Miss Josephine vouches for you." Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled of fresh bread. Martha bustled about, heating soup and clucking over Josephine's bedraggled state, while Forrest sat somewhat awkwardly at the kitchen table. his large frame out of place among the feminine touches Josephine's mother had added years ago. "You'll stay the night in the barn, Mr. Tucker," Martha declared as she set bowls of steaming soup before them. "It's too late to be heading back to town, and Miss Josephine says you saved her life, so that's the least we can do." "That's very kind, madam," Forrest replied, amusement flickering in his eyes at the older woman's commanding tone. After they'd eaten, Martha insisted on examining Josephine's shoulder, tutting at the bruise that had spread across her pale skin. "You'll need to rest this for a few days, young lady. No more gallivanting into dangerous mines." "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Mrs. Fletcher," Josephine said, wincing as the woman applied a salve to the injury. "I need to organize workers to begin extracting the silver. We found a rich vein today." Martha paused, her eyes widening. "You don't mean Father was right all along," Josephine confirmed with a tired smile. "The Silver Creek mine is going to be productive again." "Glory be," Martha whispered, making the sign of the cross. "Your poor father can rest easy now, knowing you'll be taken care of." Later, after Martha had gone home and Forrest had retreated to the barn with blankets and a promise to check on Josephine in the morning, she sat alone on the porch, watching the stars. The events of the day seemed almost dreamlike now, the terrifying darkness, the collapse, meeting Forrest, finding the silver. Everything had changed in the span of hours. She touched the pouch of silver ore in her lap, concrete proof that it hadn't been a dream. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: hiring workers, negotiating with the bank, establishing herself as a mine owner in a town that still raised eyebrows at the notion of a woman in business. But tonight, exhaustion and a curious sense of peace kept those worries at bay. A sound from the barn drew her attention. Forrest, emerging into the moonlight, apparently restless as well. He approached the porch slowly, as if uncertain of his welcome at this late hour. "Can't sleep?" he asked, stopping at the bottom of the steps. "Too many thoughts," Josephine admitted. "It's been quite a day." He nodded, looking up at the star-filled sky. "Mind if I join you for a spell?" She gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Please do." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the night air cool and sweet around them. Crickets chirped in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. "What will you do now?" Forrest finally asked. "With the mine, I mean." Josephine considered the question. "Hire workers, extract the silver, pay off the bank. Beyond that." She shrugged her good shoulder. "I haven't thought that far ahead. Running a mine is hard work," he observed. "Dangerous too, as you saw today." "Are you trying to discourage me, Mr. Tucker?" He smiled, moonlight silvering his features. "Not at all, just offering perspective. And my help if you want it." "As my foreman?" Josephine asked, remembering their conversation on the mountainside. "To start with," Forrest replied, something in his tone making her look at him more closely. "I've been drifting a long time, Miss Bauer, looking for something worth staying for." The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. Josephine felt her heartbeat quicken, surprised by the intensity of her reaction to this man she'd known for less than a day. "Silver Creek could use men like you," she said carefully. "Men who know mining and aren't afraid of hard work." "And what about you, Miss Bauer?" Forrest asked, his voice gentler now. "Could you use a man like me in your life, not just your mine?" The directness of the question took her breath away. "Mr. Tucker, we barely know each other." "True enough," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "But sometimes life has a way of revealing a person's true character in a matter of hours, not years. Down in that mine, I saw a woman of extraordinary courage and determination. A woman I'd like to know better if she'll allow it." Josephine looked away, flustered by his words and the sincere way he delivered them. "You're very forward, Mr. Tucker. Frontier life doesn't leave much room for beating around the bush," he replied with a small smile. "But I've overstepped. Forgive me." He started to rise, but Josephine's hand on his arm stopped him. "No, wait, I'm not accustomed to such directness, but I appreciate your honesty." She took a deep breath. I would like to know you better as well." Forrest settled back in his chair, his expression softening. Then perhaps we could start by using each other's given names, at least when we're alone. Very well, Forrest, Josephine said, testing the name on her tongue. Thank you, Josephine, he replied, and something about the way he said her name made her cheeks warm. They talked late into the night, sharing pieces of their lives. Forrest told her about his years of wandering after leaving Silver Creek working mines in Montana, cattle drives in Texas, even a brief stint as a deputy marshal in Arizona Territory. Josephine spoke of growing up as the only child of a determined miner and a gentle mother who had died when she was 12, of learning to run the household and help her father with the business side of mining. Dawn was breaking when they finally parted, Josephine to her bed and Forrest back to the barn, both knowing that something significant had begun between them, something as unexpected as it was promising. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Word of the silver strike brought miners flocking to Silver Creek, and Josephine found herself in the unfamiliar position of being one of the town's most important employers. With Forrest's help, she reorganized the mine operation, hiring experienced men and implementing safety measures that had been neglected during her father's illness. True to his word, Harold Monroe had spoken to the bank, and Jenkins had not only withdrawn his foreclosure threat but offered Josephine a line of credit for mine improvements. The first shipment of silver ore to the smelter in Denver brought a return that allowed her to pay off the most pressing debts and begin renovations on both the mine and the Bauer home. Through it all, Forrest remained by her side, his knowledge of mining operations proving invaluable. As foreman, he commanded respect from the miners, many of whom had initially balked at taking orders from a woman. His presence made the transition smoother, though Josephine made it clear to everyone that final decisions rested with her. Their personal relationship developed alongside their professional one. Forrest joined Josephine for supper most evenings, and they fell into the habit of sitting on the porch afterward, talking until the stars came out. He moved from the barn to a small cabin on the property, close enough to be called if needed but far enough to maintain propriety. Silver Creek buzzed with gossip about the handsome mine foreman and his obvious interest in the young mine owner. Some approved, seeing the practical advantages of such a match. Others whispered that Josephine was being taken advantage of by a drifter with his eye on her newfound wealth. "You shouldn't let it bother you," Forrest told her one evening as they rode back from inspecting a new ventilation shaft. "People will talk no matter what you do." "I know," Josephine sighed, adjusting her hat against the setting sun. "But I wish they'd focus on the mine's success instead of whether or not you're courting me for my silver." Forrest reined his horse to a stop, turning in his saddle to look at her directly. "Is that what you think, Josephine, that I'm interested in you because of the mine?" "No," she replied quickly, meeting his gaze. "No, I don't believe that, but sometimes I wonder why you stayed. You could work any mine in the West with your experience for better pay than I can offer." "I didn't stay for the mine," Forrest said quietly. "I stayed for you. I thought I'd made that clear." The intensity in his blue eyes made Josephine's breath catch. Over the weeks, their friendship had deepened, occasional touches and lingering glances hinting at stronger feelings neither had fully expressed. "You have," she admitted. "And I'm glad you stayed. She hesitated, searching for the right words. "I'm not used to depending on anyone since Father died. Having you here helping me, supporting me, it's wonderful and terrifying all at once." Forrest's expression softened. "Independence is a fine quality, Josephine, but there's strength in knowing when to lean on others too." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I'm not trying to take over your mine or your life. I just want to be part of both if you'll have me." The simple sincerity of his words touched Josephine deeply. Before she could respond, however, the sound of approaching hooves interrupted the moment. They turned to see one of their miners, Jeb Wilson, riding hard toward them. "Miss Bauer, Mr. Tucker," he called, reining his horse to a skidding stop beside them. "There's trouble at the mine." "What kind of trouble?" Forrest demanded, instantly alert, claim jumpers. Jeb panted. 5 of them rode in, armed to the teeth. They're saying the claim wasn't properly registered when your pa died, Miss Bauer, and it's open territory now. Josephine's blood ran cold. That's ridiculous. I have all the proper documentation. They ain't the type to listen to reason, madam, Jeb said grimly. They've run off most of the afternoon shift and are holed up at the main shaft. Forrest's expression darkened. Josephine, ride back to town, get the sheriff. And leave you to deal with them alone. Absolutely not, she retorted, already turning her horse toward the mine. Josephine, Forrest called after her, spurring his own mount to catch up. This isn't safe. These men are dangerous. It's my mine, Forrest, she threw over her shoulder. I won't hide in town while armed men steal what's rightfully mine. She heard him curse under his breath, but he didn't try to stop her again. Instead, he pulled alongside, his expression grim but determined. Stay behind me when we get there, promise me that much at least. Josephine nodded, fear and anger warring in her stomach as they galloped toward the mine. The scene that greeted them at the main shaft was tense. 5 rough-looking men had positioned themselves around the entrance, rifles in hand. A few of Josephine's miners stood at a distance, watching warily. The leader of the interlopers, a tall man with a scarred face, stepped forward as Josephine and Forrest dismounted. This is private property, Josephine declared before the man could speak. You're trespassing. The man smirked, looking her up and down in a way that made her skin crawl. Not according to territorial law, little lady. Your pa's claim expired when he died and you didn't re-register it proper. We've filed our own claim as of this morning. That's a lie, Josephine retorted, fighting to keep her voice steady. The claim was transferred to me legally. I have the documents to prove it. Easy to forge documents, the man shrugged. Judge'll have to sort it out and that could take months. Meanwhile, we'll just help ourselves to some of that fine silver you've been pulling out. Forrest stepped forward, his hand resting casually near his holstered pistol. I suggest you boys move on. The law in Silver Creek won't look kindly on claim jumping. The scarred man sized Forrest up, recognition dawning in his eyes. Well, Forrest Tucker, heard you were back in these parts. Still playing hero, I see. Do I know you? Forrest asked, his voice deceptively calm. Name's Vince Holloway. You put my brother in the ground 8 years ago when you were wearing a deputy's badge down in Arizona. Josephine glanced at Forrest in surprise. He'd mentioned being a deputy but had never spoken of killing anyone. If you're Roy Holloway's brother, then you know he drew first and left me no choice, Forrest replied evenly. Man hears different stories, depending on who's telling them, Holloway said, his hand tightening on his rifle. But that's ancient history. Right now, we're just businessmen claiming an abandoned mine. There's nothing abandoned about this mine, Josephine interjected, and if you don't leave immediately, you'll be the ones facing the law. Holloway's gaze shifted back to her, his smile turning ugly. Spirited little thing, ain't she, Tucker? I can see why you've been hanging around. Maybe when we settle this claim business, you can stay on and work for me. Forrest's expression hardened, but before he could respond, the sound of galloping hooves announced new arrivals. Sheriff Davis and 3 deputies rode into view, rifles ready. What's going on here, Miss Bauer? The sheriff called, dismounting with a grunt. These men are trying to steal my mine, Sheriff, Josephine replied, relief evident in her voice. They're claiming the registration lapsed after my father's death. Davis turned to Holloway. That true, mister. We filed a legal claim this morning in Boulder City, Holloway replied smoothly. Found this mine abandoned and unregistered. That's horseshit, one of Josephine's miners called out. We've been working this mine steady for months, the sheriff scratched his beard thoughtfully. Miss Bauer's been operating this mine since her father passed. Everyone in town knows that. Operating illegally then, Holloway insisted. Check the territorial records. I have all the proper documentation, Sheriff, Josephine said firmly. The claim transfer was registered with your office and with the Territorial Land Office in Denver, Davis nodded. That's my recollection as well. He turned back to Holloway, his hand resting on his pistol. So it seems to me you boys are the ones in the wrong here. I'm going to have to ask you to clear out of Silver Creek." Tension crackled in the air as Holloway and his men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. For a moment, Josephine feared they would choose violence, but finally, Holloway lowered his rifle. "We'll go," he said, his eyes cold as they fixed on Forrest. "For now, but this ain't over, Tucker, not by a long shot." "It is if you're smart," Forrest replied quietly. "Ride out and don't come back." With muttered curses and dark looks, Holloway and his men mounted their horses and rode away, dust billowing in their wake. "You folks might want to post guards until we're sure they've left the area," the sheriff advised, turning to Josephine. "And I'd suggest you double-check that registration paperwork, just to be safe." "I will, Sheriff. Thank you," Josephine replied, still shaken by the confrontation. After the sheriff and his deputies departed, Josephine organized her miners into shifts to guard the entrance, promising extra pay for the inconvenience. Forrest remained silent throughout, his expression unreadable. It wasn't until they were riding back to the Bauer homestead, the sun slipping behind the mountains, that Josephine broached the subject. "You never told me about killing a man in Arizona," she said quietly, Forrest's shoulders tensed. "It's not something I'm proud of, even if it was justified." Holloway seemed to think otherwise. "Men like Holloway twist the truth to suit themselves," Forrest replied, his voice tight. "Roy Holloway was a thief and a murderer. He killed a shopkeeper during a robbery, and when I tried to bring him in, he drew on me. I had no choice." Josephine studied his profile, noting the pain in his expression. "I believe you." He glanced at her, surprise and gratitude flickering across his features. "Not everyone would without question." "I've seen enough of your character to know what kind of man you are, Forrest Tucker," she said simply. "Do you think Holloway will come back?" "Yes," Forrest admitted after a moment's hesitation. "Men like that don't let go of grudges easily. And now he has 2 reasons to come after us: the mine and revenge." The gravity of the situation settled over Josephine like a weight. The silver strike that had seemed like such a blessing now carried with it the threat of violence. She thought of her father, who had spent his life searching for this vein, and wondered if he had foreseen the dangers it would bring. "We'll need to be careful," she said finally. "Increase security at the mine, perhaps hire more men." "I'll take care of it," Forrest promised. "No one is going to take that mine from you, Josephine. Not while I'm around." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed her despite the circumstances. As they reached the homestead, twilight deepening around them, Josephine made a decision. Whatever came next, she would face it with Forrest at her side, not just as her foreman, but as something more, something that grew stronger each day despite the challenges that threatened to overwhelm them. The next morning, Josephine rode into town early, determined to verify her claim paperwork as the sheriff had suggested. The land office was a small addition to the courthouse, manned by a perpetually harried clerk named Percy Simmons. "Morning, Miss Bauer," Percy greeted her, pushing his spectacles up on his nose. "What brings you in so early?" "I need to confirm my mine registration, Percy," Josephine replied, removing her gloves. "There was some trouble yesterday with claim jumpers." Percy's eyebrows shot up. "Claim jumpers?" "In Silver Creek. Sheriff Davis mentioned nothing when he came by earlier." "It was resolved for the moment," she explained, "but I want to ensure all my paperwork is in order, just in case they try to challenge it legally." Of course," Percy muttered, turning to the wall of file cabinets behind him. Bauer, here we are." He pulled out a folder and spread its contents on the counter between them. Josephine recognized her father's original claim certificate, dated 1857, along with various renewal documents over the years. At the bottom of the stack lay the transfer papers she had filed after his death. Percy adjusted his spectacles, examining the documents carefully. "Everything seems to be in order, Miss Bauer. The claim was properly transferred to you and is valid through next April, when the annual fee will be due again." Relief washed over Josephine. so there's no legal basis for anyone to challenge my ownership. None whatsoever, Percy confirmed, gathering the papers back into the folder. Though I'd recommend keeping copies of these documents at the mine itself, just in case anyone comes asking questions when you're not around. I'll do that. Thank you, Percy. As she turned to leave, Percy cleared his throat. Miss Bauer, if you don't mind my saying, it's a remarkable thing you've accomplished with that mine. Your father would be proud. Josephine smiled, touched by the unexpected praise. Thank you. That means a great deal to me. Outside, Silver Creek was coming to life, shopkeepers sweeping their boardwalks, freight wagons rumbling down the main street. Josephine headed toward the general store, planning to stock up on supplies before returning to the mine. As she passed the Silver Nugget Saloon, a familiar figure emerged from the Batwing doors. Miss Bauer, Sheriff Davis called, hurrying to catch up with her. Got a moment? Of course, Sheriff, she replied, noting the concern on his weathered face. Is something wrong? Davis glanced around before lowering his voice. Just wanted to warn you, I sent a deputy to Boulder City this morning to check on Holloway's claimed story. Turns out, he did file some papers, though they won't hold up against your proper registration. Percy just confirmed my paperwork is in order, Josephine nodded. So there's nothing to worry about legally. Legally, no, Davis agreed. But men like Holloway don't always play by legal rules. I'd keep a sharp eye out if I were you. And that foreman of yours, Tucker, he seems capable enough, but Holloway clearly has a personal grudge there. Forrest can handle himself, Josephine said, more confidently than she felt. And we're increasing security at the mine. Good, Davis nodded. Just remember, if you need help, that's what I'm here for. Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate your concern. After completing her errands, Josephine headed back to the mine, her wagon loaded with supplies. As she approached, she was pleased to see that Forrest had already implemented increased security. Armed men patrolled the perimeter, and a new gate had been constructed across the main access road. Looking more like a fort than a mine, she commented as Forrest helped her down from the wagon. Better safe than sorry, he replied, his eyes scanning the surrounding hillsides. Any trouble in town? None. Sheriff Davis confirmed what we already knew. Holloway filed some papers in Boulder City, but they won't stand up against my valid registration. She hesitated, then added, He warned me that Holloway isn't likely to play by the rules, though. Forrest's expression darkened. He's right about that. The Holloways never were known for their respect for the law. You knew him before, not just his brother. Vince rode with the same outlaw gang as Roy back in Arizona, Forrest explained, lowering his voice so the nearby workers wouldn't overhear. Never could prove he was involved in any of the robberies directly, so he walked free when we rounded up the rest. Josephine frowned. And now he's here in my mine. Not in your mine, Forrest corrected firmly. Not while I'm breathing. The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent a warmth through Josephine that had nothing to do with the autumn sun overhead. Come see what we've found while you were in town, Forrest continued, gesturing toward the main shaft. The new vein is proving even richer than we thought. Inside the mine, the clink of pickaxes and rumble of ore carts created a constant backdrop of sound. Miners nodded respectfully as Josephine and Forrest passed, no longer surprised to see the mine's owner venturing underground. Since the collapse that had brought them together, Forrest had insisted on regular inspections of all support structures, and the main shafts were now considerably safer than they had been during her father's illness. We've extended the drift along the vein about 20 feet since yesterday, Forrest explained as they reached the active face. Silver content is increasing the further we go. Josephine examined the exposed rock face, where veins of silvery metal threaded through the darker stone. It's beautiful, she murmured, running her fingers over the rough surface. Worth fighting for, Forrest agreed, watching her with a warmth that suggested he might not be referring only to the silver. Over the next weeks, the mine's production increased steadily, each shipment to the Denver smelter returning greater profits than the last. Josephine used the money to improve conditions for her workers, installing better ventilation systems and paying higher wages than most mines in the region. In return, her miners showed exceptional loyalty, especially after word spread of the confrontation with Holloway and his men. As October gave way to November, bringing colder weather and occasional snow to the high country, Josephine began to hope that perhaps Holloway had decided to pursue easier targets elsewhere. There had been no further sightings of him or his men, and life in Silver Creek settled into a comfortable rhythm. Josephine's relationship with Forrest deepened as well. Their evening conversations on the porch had moved inside to the warmth of the parlor as winter approached, and increasingly, those conversations extended into shared dreams for the future, both for the mine and for themselves. "You should consider expanding," Forrest suggested one evening as they sat before the fire, reviewing the latest production figures. "There's enough capital now to open a second shaft, increase your output significantly." "Our output," Josephine corrected him gently. "This success belongs to both of us, Forrest." He looked up, surprise and pleasure mingling in his expression. "That's generous of you, but it's your mine." "Perhaps," she agreed, setting aside the ledger to move closer to him on the sofa. "But its future is something I've come to think of as ours." The word hung between them, laden with meaning beyond the mine. Forrest's hand found hers, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Ours," he repeated softly. "I like the sound of that." Their first kiss, when it came, felt as inevitable as the changing seasons, gentle at first, then deepening with an intensity that left Josephine breathless. Forrest's arms around her were strong and sure, his lips conveying all the words they hadn't yet spoken. When they finally drew apart, his blue eyes searched hers, a question in their depths. "I love you, Josephine Bauer," he said simply. "I think I have since the moment I found you in that dark tunnel, too stubborn to admit you were lost." Josephine laughed softly, joy bubbling up inside her. "And I love you, Forrest Tucker. Though I might have taken a bit longer to admit it to myself," he smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're worth waiting for, worth staying for." As snow began to fall outside, blanketing the world in white silence, they made plans for the mine, for the town they both now called home, and for a future neither had imagined possible before fate brought them together in the darkness beneath Silver Creek Mountain. The week before Christmas, Silver Creek transformed into a winter wonderland. Evergreen boughs and red ribbons adorned the storefronts along Main Street, and even the rough exterior of the Silver Nugget Saloon sported festive decorations. Inside the Bauer home, Josephine hummed carols as she decorated a small tree in the parlor, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Need some help with that?" Forrest asked, entering with an armload of firewood. 3 months after their first meeting, he had moved from the cabin to the main house, an arrangement that raised eyebrows in town but felt right to both of them. They had agreed to marry in the spring, when the mountain passes cleared and Forrest's sister could travel from California for the ceremony. "I can't reach the top," Josephine admitted, gesturing to the star that still lay unwrapped on the table. Forrest set down the wood and picked up the star, easily placing it atop the small tree. His hands came to rest on Josephine's shoulders as they admired their handiwork together. "First Christmas in our home," he said softly. "First of many." Josephine leaned back against him, contentment washing over her. The past months had brought challenges, continued negotiations with the bank, the complexities of expanding the mine's operations, occasional rumors of Holloway's gang operating in nearby counties, but through it all, their partnership had only strengthened. "I have something for you," Forrest said suddenly. "I wasn't planning to give it to you until Christmas, but—" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. Emptying its contents into his palm, he revealed a ring, a simple silver band set with a small diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained, a hint of nervousness in his voice. I've been carrying it since I came back to Silver Creek, waiting for the right moment. Josephine's eyes filled with tears as he took her hand and slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, gleaming in the firelight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I'll treasure it always." Their kiss was interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Forrest frowned, glancing at the grandfather clock in the corner. Who could that be at this hour? He moved to answer the door, Josephine following close behind. Sheriff Davis stood on the porch, snow dusting his hat and shoulders, his expression grave. "Evening, Tucker, Miss Bauer," he nodded. "Sorry to disturb you, but I've got news you need to hear." "Come in, Sheriff," Josephine invited, concern growing at his serious demeanor. "Can I offer you some coffee?" "No, thank you, madam. This won't take long." He stepped inside, removing his hat. "Got word from the marshal over in Boulder City this afternoon. Vince Holloway and his gang robbed the bank there yesterday, shot the teller dead when he tried to raise the alarm." Forrest's expression hardened. "They heading this way?" "Can't say for certain," Davis replied. "But given Holloway's interest in your mine and his personal grudge against you, Tucker, I thought you should be warned." "Thank you, Sheriff," Josephine said, unconsciously touching the ring on her finger. "We'll be extra vigilant." "I've doubled patrols around town," Davis continued, "but your mine and home are a fair piece out. Might want to consider staying in town until Holloway's caught." Forrest shook his head. "We're not abandoning our home or the mine because of Holloway, but we'll take precautions." After the sheriff departed, Josephine and Forrest sat at the kitchen table, the festive mood of earlier replaced by grim determination as they formulated a plan. The mine had already implemented security measures, but the homestead was more vulnerable. "We should warn the miners," Josephine said. "Many of them live in the company housing near the main shaft." "I'll ride out first thing tomorrow," Forrest agreed. "And I think we should move the next silver shipment up. Get it to Denver before Holloway has a chance to make a move." "Is that wise? The roads are treacherous with the snow." "Better than leaving it here as a target," Forrest replied, his jaw set in a hard line. "I'll take it myself with a few of the men. Armed escort." Josephine's heart clenched at the thought of Forrest facing Holloway and his gang. "I don't like this, Forrest. Let the sheriff handle Holloway. Davis is a good man, but he doesn't know Holloway like I do." Forrest took her hands in his. "I'm not looking for a fight, Josephine, but I won't hide while he threatens everything we've built." The following morning dawned clear and cold. Forrest rode out early to the mine, promising to return by nightfall after organizing the silver shipment. Josephine spent the day restlessly moving between tasks, her mind on Forrest and the danger that Holloway represented. Around mid-afternoon, as the winter sun began its early descent, she heard hoofbeats approaching. Relieved that Forrest had returned sooner than expected, she hurried to the window and froze. 5 riders were approaching the house, and none of them was Forrest. Heart-pounding, Josephine reached for her father's old shotgun, kept loaded above the mantelpiece since the first confrontation with Holloway. She checked the loads and positioned herself near the front window, partially concealed by the curtain. The riders pulled up in front of the house, and Josephine's worst fears were confirmed as Vince Holloway dismounted, his scarred face unmistakable even at a distance. The others remained on their horses, rifles ready. "Miss Bauer," Holloway called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. "I know you're in there. Come on out so we can have a civilized conversation." Josephine remained silent, the shotgun steady in her hands. Through the curtain, she could see Holloway's patience waning. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he shouted. "I just want to talk about that mine of yours, maybe make you an offer." When no response came, one of the riders muttered something to Holloway, who nodded. The man dismounted and approached the house from the side, clearly intending to force entry. Josephine swung the shotgun toward the side window, her finger tightening on the trigger. Before she could fire, however, the distant sound of galloping hooves drew everyone's attention. A group of riders was approaching fast from the direction of town, Forrest at their head, with several miners behind him. Holloway cursed, drawing his pistol as Forrest and his men thundered into the yard. Gunfire erupted, and Josephine ducked instinctively as a bullet shattered the window above her. The next minutes were chaos: shouts, gunshots, the whinny of frightened horses. Josephine crept to the broken window and risked a glance outside. 2 of Holloway's men were down, and the others were retreating toward the tree line, firing as they went. Forrest and the miners had taken cover behind the water trough and wagon, returning fire steadily through the smoke and confusion. Josephine saw Holloway raise his rifle, taking careful aim at Forrest's position. Without hesitation, she raised the shotgun and fired through the broken window. The blast caught Holloway in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his rifle flying. "Josephine, stay down," Forrest shouted, having spotted her at the window. But Josephine was already moving, racing to the back door as she saw Holloway stagger toward it, clutching his bleeding shoulder. She reached the door just as he crashed against it, the impact splintering the wood. Holloway burst through, his face contorted with pain and rage. "You shot me, you little—" Josephine swung the empty shotgun like a club, catching him across the face. He stumbled backward but didn't fall, drawing a knife from his belt with his uninjured arm. "Nowhere to run now," he snarled, advancing on her. Josephine backed away, frantically searching for a weapon. Her hand closed around the poker from the fireplace just as Holloway lunged. She swung the iron rod with all her strength, connecting with his knife hand. The blade clattered to the floor and Holloway howled in pain. The back door burst open again and Forrest appeared, pistol drawn. "Step away from her, Holloway," he commanded, his voice deadly calm. Holloway froze, hatred burning in his eyes as he looked between Forrest and Josephine. "Should have killed you in Arizona when I had the chance, Tucker." "But you didn't," Forrest replied evenly, "and now it's over. Sheriff Davis is on his way, you're finished." For a moment it seemed Holloway might lunge anyway, choosing death over capture. Then, with a defeated slump of his shoulders, he sank to his knees. "Josephine." Forrest kept his gun trained on Holloway, but his eyes sought hers. "Are you hurt?" "No," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm all right." Outside, the gunfire had ceased. Voices called to one another as Forrest's men secured the remaining members of Holloway's gang. The immediate danger had passed, but Josephine knew the image of Holloway bursting through her door, knife in hand, would haunt her dreams for some time to come. Sheriff Davis arrived with his deputies shortly after, taking custody of Holloway and his surviving men. 2 of the gang hadn't survived the shootout, and one of Josephine's miners had been wounded, though not seriously. "You'll need to come to town tomorrow to give statements," Davis told them as his deputies led the prisoners away. "But from what I can see, this was clear self-defense." He tipped his hat to Josephine. "Mighty brave thing you did, Miss Bauer. Not many would have the courage to stand their ground against the likes of Holloway." After the sheriff and his entourage departed, Josephine sat at the kitchen table while Forrest tended to a small cut on her arm she hadn't even noticed in the heat of the moment. "I thought I'd lost you," he said quietly, his hands gentle as he wrapped a bandage around her arm. "When I heard Holloway was heading this way, all I could think was getting back to you." "How did you know?" Josephine asked. "That they were coming here. One of our men spotted them on the ridge above the mine," Forrest explained. "I gathered everyone I could and rode for the house immediately." His hands stilled on her arm. "If we'd been any later." Josephine placed her hand over his. "But you weren't. You came exactly when I needed you." "Like the day we met," Forrest murmured, bringing her hand to his lips, "finding you in the dark." Later, after the broken windows had been boarded up, and the miners who had fought alongside Forrest had returned to their homes near the mine, Josephine and Forrest sat before the fire, the events of the day settling over them like the snow that had begun falling again outside. "I don't want to wait until spring," Josephine said suddenly, turning to face him. "To get married, I mean. Life's too uncertain, too precious to waste a single day." Forrest's expression softened, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Are you sure?" What about your plans for a proper wedding, with your friends from back east and my sister from California? We can have a celebration later when the pass is clear, Josephine replied. But I want to be your wife now, Forrest. Today showed me that tomorrow is never guaranteed. He gathered her in his arms, his kiss both tender and passionate. Then we'll see Reverend Phillips tomorrow, he said when they finally broke apart. Make it official before the week is out. Josephine smiled, a sense of rightness settling over her. From darkness to light, she murmured. That's our story, isn't it? Finding our way together. And we always will, Forrest promised, the ring on her finger catching the firelight as he held her close. Josephine and Forrest were married 3 days later in Silver Creek's small church, with snow falling gently outside the windows. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by the miners and their families, Martha Fletcher, who wept unabashedly throughout, and even Sheriff Davis, who had come directly from Boulder City with news that Holloway and his remaining men would stand trial for murder and bank robbery, ensuring they would never threaten Silver Creek again. As Josephine and Forrest exchanged vows, she thought of her father and the silver vein he had discovered in his final days, the legacy that had led her into the darkness of the mine where Forrest had found her. What had seemed like disaster that day had become the greatest blessing of her life, a truth she reflected on with wonder as Reverend Phillips pronounced them husband and wife. The Silver Creek mine continued to prosper under their joint management, becoming one of the most productive in the territory. By the following summer, they had expanded operations to 3 shafts and employed over 50 men, many with families who settled in the growing community around the mine. True to their word, they held a proper celebration when the mountain passes cleared, with Forrest's sister traveling from California and Josephine's childhood friends journeying from back east to share in their happiness. The party lasted 3 days, with music and dancing spilling from the newly expanded Bauer home into the warm June evenings. Over the years, Silver Creek grew from a small mining settlement into a thriving town, with Josephine and Forrest at the heart of its development. They established a school, funded the building of a proper hospital, and invested in businesses that would sustain the community even after the silver eventually played out. Their greatest joy, however, came with the birth of their children's first daughter, Clara, with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determination, followed 2 years later by a son they named Thomas, after Josephine's father. Both children grew up understanding the value of hard work and the importance of community, lessons their parents embodied every day. On cool evenings, Forrest would often tell the children the story of how he and their mother met, of a lantern going out in a dark mine, of finding the light together. As the years passed, the story took on the quality of legend in Silver Creek, a testament to the fact that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not in the silver hidden within the mountain, but in the connections forged when 2 people find each other in unexpected circumstances. Josephine never forgot the terror of that day when her lantern went out in the mine, leaving her in complete darkness. But she also never forgot the moment when Forrest Tucker appeared in the blackness, extending his hand and promising to lead her to the light. In many ways, he had been doing exactly that ever since, through the challenges of building a business, the danger of confronting men like Holloway, the joys of creating a family, and the everyday moments that made up a life well lived together. On their 25th wedding anniversary, long after the Silver Creek mine had made them wealthy beyond anything Josephine's father could have imagined, Forrest took her back to the mountainside where they had emerged from the mine that first day. The old shaft entrance had been sealed years ago when newer, safer tunnels had been established, but the view across the valley to Silver Creek was as beautiful as ever. You ever think about how different our lives might have been if your lantern hadn't gone out that day? Forrest asked as they stood together, arms around each other against the autumn chill. Sometimes, Josephine admitted, leaning into his embrace. But then I remember what you told me when we were lost in the dark. What was that? You said, hold my hand, we'll find the light together. She smiled up at him, the years having only deepened her love for this man who had come to her rescue so long ago. And we did, didn't we? We found it together. Forrest's kiss was as tender as it had been on their wedding day, his eyes still holding the same light that had guided her from darkness to a life more beautiful than she could have imagined. We did, he agreed softly, and we always will. As they made their way back down the mountainside toward home, toward their children and grandchildren, toward the community they had built together from a single silver vein, and an unexpected meeting in a darkened mine, Josephine Bauer Tucker knew with absolute certainty that some lights, once found, never truly dim. And some hands, once clasped in the darkness, never really let go.